Welcome, everyone, and thanks for tuning into the Brain Initiative setting. Today, I'm joined by a fantastic group of people who are all associated with the Brain Initiative Alliance. We have Michelle Elekonich, David Markowitz, Caroline Montojo, John Ngai, and Alyssa Picchini Schaffer, and I apologize for all my mangling of the names. And I think the Brain Initiative is just fantastically important for neuroscience, and I think it certainly has changed the way we do a lot of things. And I think it also promises to change the future. And in that sense, it's great to get the opportunity to talk about like funding streams in neuroscience and just to learn more about the Brain Initiative Alliance. And as we have a fixed timeline, why don't we immediately start with Michelle Elekonich?
Sure. Hi, I'm Michelle Elekonich. I am the Deputy Division Director for the Division of Integrative Organismal Systems at NSF, National Science Foundation. And we're the home of neuroscience at NSF. We are the location of long-running core programs in neural systems. And our Brain Alliance activities are ongoing. So we're continuing with the collaborative research in cognitive in computational neuroscience and the neural and cognitive science efforts, and have recently made a new set of Neuromatch Awards, which are providing new connections and new tools to the community.
Well, fantastic, great. So let's see. We should next hear from David.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute IARPA's perspective to this event. I'm David Markowitz. I'm a computational neuroscientist by training and a current program manager at IARPA, the Intelligence Advanced Research Project activity, which is the high-risk, high-reward research arm of the United States intelligence community. Many of you have probably heard of our older sibling, DARPA, which develops technologies to support the needs of national defense. IARPA applies the same actively managed applied research model, but focused on the needs of the intelligence community. And when I say applied research, that means we apply scientific insights to develop tools that can help us address real-world problems. That differentiates us from the basic science and biomedically oriented funding bodies in the US government. I'll provide some brief background about IARPA's neuroscience work, just so you know where we're coming from. And then I'll suggest a few areas where I see opportunities for future investments in both the public and the private sector, which I think was some of the guidance that we got for this workshop. Historically, IARPA's neuroscience portfolio has been driven by a desire to help intelligence analysts do their jobs better. Prior to the Brain Initiative, most of the portfolio at IARPA in neuroscience was focused on cognitive neuroscience. Since 2014, however, IARPA has directly supported the Brain Initiative through the Microns program, or the Machine Intelligence from Cortical Networks program, which I'm fortunate to run. Microns is focused on generating large-scale structure function data sets for encompassing complete cortical circuits, so we can map the physiology and the synaptic connectivity of circuits in awake animals, so that we can use insights derived from the analysis of those data to guide the development of improved machine learning algorithms and hopefully in the future, better computing architectures. Microns has contributed a lot of innovation on the experimental side, but what I'm really excited about for the future of the field, where I see a lot of opportunity going forward, is using data-driven models to support the analysis of these really rich data sets that are coming out of programs like Microns and like the ones being supported by our partner agencies. This is a good segue to talking about the changing landscape of opportunities in neuroscience. And while I can't talk about IARPA's future funding priorities in particular, I do want to emphasize that I think the bedrock of the Brain Initiative, and frankly, the future of neuroscience, is multidisciplinary collaboration. Whether you're developing new tools or acquiring and analyzing data at scale, or applying new tools and insights to industry problems, you're going to need broad scientific and engineering expertise. The BRAIN Initiative has already funded several large multidisciplinary consortia. There are several new academic neuroscience institutes that draw faculty from a broad range of disciplines. And there's a nascent crop of neuroscience startup companies that are recruiting physiologists, engineers, data scientists. So I think that neuroscientists who learn to speak the language of other disciplines will be poised to reap the benefits of future collaborative opportunities in the field. Last, I definitely see an increasing appetite for neuroscience among private sector funders. This includes philanthropists, but also the venture capital community. One of my roles at IARPA is to help cultivate industries around problems that matter to our government partners. And so I do a lot of outreach to entrepreneurs and funders in the private sector. The BRAIN Initiative has clearly catalyzed a lot of interest by people outside of academia about how we can build new platforms for studying diseases of the nervous system, how we can build new devices for interfacing with the nervous system, and how we can develop new algorithms and computing technologies using neuroscience as a guide. Just recently, there were several large exits just in the neural interfacing space, a couple $100 million each minimum, from fairly young companies, 4 or 5 years old. And that was just in the neural interfacing space. So I definitely see increasing opportunities for entrepreneurially minded neuroscientists to build new companies and to get the funding that they need to execute on an ambitious vision. There are a lot of approaches in neuroscience that I particularly am excited about for the future, but I think that's enough of an introduction. So, thank you.
Great, thanks David for the great introduction. We should continue with Caroline then.
Yes, thank you very much, Konrad. So my name is Caroline Montojo, and I am the Director of Life Sciences and Brain Initiatives at the Kavli Foundation. The Kavli Foundation represents the private side of what's called the public-private partnership of the US Brain Initiative. Just to provide some context for our science audience out there, private foundations like the Kavli Foundation, Simons Foundation, and others can complement federal efforts from NSF, IARPA, NIH, and others to advance the BRAIN Initiative because foundations like ours have some different approaches to supporting science. For those who are not familiar with the Kavli Foundation, our mission is to advance science for the benefit of humanity. We primarily do this through 2 programs. One of them is the Kavli Institutes, of which we have 20 of them around the world in our 4 fields that we support. This is neuroscience, nanoscience, astrophysics, and theoretical physics. And we also have a meetings and convenings program. And one of the things that we really look for in our meetings and convenings program is thinking about opportunities at the intersections between fields. And so related to David's earlier remarks, we are very interested in thinking about other approaches that come from other fields and how we can bring different fields together, different sectors together to advance science and advance neuroscience. One of the approaches that private funders often use is the ability to act in a really catalytic and flexible way on needs that are coming from the scientific community. So at the Kavli Foundation, a major part of my job is to speak directly with scientists and learn about what kinds of gaps there are in the field, what kinds of opportunities there are to support these gaps in a unique and early stage way. And this is often at a time when some federal funding agencies may be not yet able to dive in to provide investments in this space. So acting at that early stage is really important. One example of our approach to supporting the BRAIN Initiative and partnering with others, including the private and public partners of the BRAIN Initiative, is in our effort with Neurodata Without Borders, also called NWB. The foundation early on in the BRAIN Initiative started hearing from many scientists in the community about the importance of establishing a robust data standard for neurophysiology data. And so in this approach of catalyzing at an early stage and partnering, we partnered with the Allen Institute, INCF, the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility, and many scientists who were leaders in this area, as well as data scientists, bringing together different disciplines and provided funding for a pilot NWB data standard. And this was before other agencies had a mechanism for funding these standards from BRAIN Initiative projects. And so the NWB data format has been increasingly adopted by the science community. So with that, for this panel, we were asked to share, as David had mentioned and Konrad had mentioned, as well as Michelle, some of our ideas, our thoughts for areas of opportunities in neuroscience and neurotechnology, or where do we see the field moving? So from our work at Kavli, I'd like to share 3 areas where I see a lot of movement. And this is informed by conversations we've been having with many of you, those from the scientific community. One of those areas is in increasing opportunities for collaboration and coordination of neuroscience efforts globally, including those catalyzed by something called the International Brain Initiative. So this is an alliance of the large-scale, nationally or regionally sponsored brain initiatives around the world. And what we've heard from the science community is that there's an opportunity for better coordination and collaboration among these large investments in neuroscience. So I see a lot of opportunity developing there. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the space of neurotechnology dissemination. This is a very difficult problem. There are many different tools coming out of neuroscience right now, and there are many stakeholders that are part of this pipeline for technology development and dissemination. I think there are gaps and opportunities to fill here. I think they're very much multi-stakeholder and involve stakeholders coming from the venture cap, industry, philanthropic space. And so fitting those puzzle pieces together to help to have an effective pipeline is the key goal there. And then one other area where I think there's a lot of opportunity for development is actually in the area of neuroethics. Thinking about this not from the compliance and regulation standpoint, which I think many in the bioethics community have seen those types of approaches, but really in the opportunity to develop closer relationships and dialogues between neuroscientists, ethicists, social scientists, public engagement experts, to understand how best to talk about all of these developments that are coming from the neuroscience and neurotechnology community. This can be very empowering for scientists, and we've been seeing many examples of a productive dialogue coming from scientists who are really at the forefront of scientific discovery, even within the Brain Initiative. So those are some areas that I just wanted to share about as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Caroline. I think we should next hear from John about the Brain Initiative.
Hi, thank you. Really delighted to be here. John Nye, Director of the NIH Brain Initiative. The comments from the previous panelists really resonate with all that we are focused on in our mission. The Brain Initiative was started in 2014. We're now in our 2nd phase. And I think it's fair to say that if we look back in the last 5, even 10 years, the rate and depth of tool development that have enabled really transformative discoveries has been simply breathtaking. And I think a lot of that success has been due to the engagement and leveraging of technology and expertise outside of the neuroscience or the biological sciences fields proper. There have been participation and really great interest from scientists from the physical sciences, chemistry and physics, as well as from the engineering sciences, and including at the interfaces in material science, and now really pushing very heavily into computer science and data science. And it's not just these sciences in service of neuroscience, but I think we're already starting to see the potential of a bidirectional flow of information and ideas and discoveries and new inventions. So this is, to me, extremely exciting. Based on the progress over the last 5+ years of the Brain Initiatives, I should say, NIH Brain Initiative, with the guidance and suggestion of this so-called Brain Working Group 2.0. This was a working group commissioned by NIH Director Francis Collins to take a second look at our strategic plan that was written in 2014 in the Brain 2025 report. And so this latest report made a very great suggestion that we look back on what we've accomplished so far and look forward to the future to ask, are there a certain number of large projects we could promote and prosecute that would truly transform the way that we not only conduct neuroscience basic research and fundamental discovery, but also as a path toward translating these discoveries into cures for human brain disorders, and and I should put in a plug as well for developing new computer architectures, I think, down the line. And so to this end, we have decided to move ahead on 3 large projects. One will be an extension of the Brain Initiative Cell Census project, which is to catalog and characterize all the major cell types in the mammalian brain. In the so-called phase 3 of the project, we will be pushing into developing a comprehensive human brain cell census. The second major project dovetails with that in developing tools for describing the complete wiring diagram of mammalian brains, the so-called brain connectivity or connectomics project. This is a very exciting project. It frankly does not quite have the technologies ready to really scale up, and the challenge will be to lay that out as a goal and see what inventions will be developed in service of that goal. And the third will take advantage of these 2 projects and actually enable them by building cell type specific tools for gaining access into postnatal animals. So this is the so-called cell type specific armamentarium project, which will really give us new tools for accessing and modulating these cells and circuits that are identified in these first 2 projects, but ultimately as a blue sky project to gain access into cell types in humans for human therapeutics. These are very large projects. They're quite ambitious. Some are more aspirational than others. What's clear to me is that we cannot do this alone. We will require the expertise, the know-how, and the commitments from other of our partner federal agencies, as well as from our private partners. So I'm looking forward to, in the next 5 years in the Brain Initiative, to really leveraging and building these public-private partnerships across the board as we face the challenges not only of developing technologies to get these projects done, but really the huge challenge will be how to disseminate and democratize these resources and technologies, both in terms of tools, reagents, know-how, but also very importantly, data. So I look forward to our discussion today in this realm. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much for the great overview. And it's always heartwarming for me to hear like real applications to make human lives better. So Alyssa, why don't we hear the Simons Foundation view from you?
Sure, thanks so much, everyone. My name is Alyssa Picchini Schaffer, and I'm a senior scientist and administrative director at the Simons Foundation. And the Simons Foundation's core mission is to advance research in mathematics and the basic sciences. I oversee the neuroscience collaborations, which includes the Simons collaboration on the global brain and the Simons collaboration on plasticity and the aging brain. The global brain funds collaborative projects in systems and computational neuroscience, and the Aging Brain Project is looking at cognitive aging outside the context of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And for both of these programs, one of the questions that we were guided to answer was sort of what does the next couple years outlook look like for funding, and what is our future priorities going to look like? For both of the neuroscience collaborations at the Simons Foundation, it's going to be another few years before we have a larger investigator RFA for senior faculty, but there will likely be opportunities for junior researchers like postdocs or junior faculty sooner. And I will just hop in here with one of the questions I see in the Q&A, which is that with private foundation funding, people hear of people being funded, but they don't always see clear calls for proposals. And I think that, at least in terms of the Simons Foundation and the neuroscience of the Simons Foundation, the best way to do it is to hear it directly from us, which is to go to our website, sign up for our newsletters, check our funding opportunities website often. We do our best to reach out within our capabilities, but sometimes we don't always get the message out as clearly and as widely as we'd like to. So please check in often, and that is absolutely the best way to see where and when our funding opportunities are coming up. For future funding, as far as sort of the process, I think we are really looking at, just like IARPA and Kavli have been speaking about, a collaborative model. And I know the NIH Brain Initiative and the NSF Brain Initiative are thinking along these lines in many ways also. From the Simons Foundation perspective, I think large awards to a single lab are much less likely moving forward. And we are really valuing the expertise, bringing different expertise together to work on solving these fundamental problems in neuroscience. Scientifically, for the global brain, I think We are likely to focus on the interactions of many brain regions. Neural coding and dynamics in more than one region of the brain and how they interact, I think, is really where we are looking scientifically moving forward. And in the Aging Brain program, we are going to be focusing on cognitive aging at all levels and characterizing that down from things like gene expression in the brain, what that looks like as an animal ages, all the way through neurophysiology and behavior. Our neuroscience programs at the Simons Foundation are very much aligned with the Brain Initiative, NIH, NSF, IARPA, and the work that Kavli is doing. Our investigators are poised to leverage brain-developed technological advances, and we are definitely aligned in supporting data standards to support the field. I think we were strongly recruited by Kavli to get on board with that mission in the best way possible, and we are very happy to support those things now. And especially with the global brain, I think our goals and ideas have been facilitated with an overlap in leadership with the Brain Initiative. At least 10 of our investigators and executive committee members have been on some of the working groups that have created the foundational documents for the directions that the Brain Initiative are going. And so I think that makes us poised to just all continue working together. So I look forward to continue working closely with everyone on this call and other foundation colleagues and government colleagues in order to keep the Brain Initiative moving.
Great, thanks so much. So I wanted to briefly go back to Michelle. So we heard a lot about individual programs at the various components here. Michelle, any chance you would share some of what's going on at NSF, what people should know about?
Sure. So in addition to the ongoing programs that have been part of the Brain Initiative, picking up on the same themes that my colleagues have brought forward, we have some new opportunities for neuroscientists to move outside of biology and interact with other computational scientists. And one of those is a new solicitation for AI, artificial intelligence institutes, that has a call for biological AI institutes, which will have a lot of resonance for neuroscience. And that comes out of our Computing, Information Science and Engineering Directorate. And so please take a look at that. We are really hopeful that we'll get some really exciting institutes that are very integrative out of that. And then we also have two calls for mid-scale infrastructure. And this is two different levels. The mid-scale one are things that are $6 to $20 million. They're planning grants to move into the bigger infrastructure projects that are $20 to $100 million. And these are very large infrastructure. So in physics, they use this to fund telescopes, but for neuroscientists and for biologists, this could go beyond that infrastructure to what you need to share community data sets, to network, and to gather, annotate, and enable access to those data sets. And it's really all only limited by the creativity of the community in terms of how they build those places and structures to bring people together and to share community tools. And we're hoping that a lot of the tools that all of us here have been investing in could come together in some of these larger infrastructure projects. And so that's a chance for the community to think broadly about what infrastructure looks like and to plan and execute a longer term vision to enable infrastructure for the next stages of the Brain Initiative.
Great, thanks so much. I have a follow-up question by Kurt Thorman that relates to an individual project. So on the IARPA webpage, he points out there's no open solicitations related to neuroscience. How can people find out about upcoming opportunities?
Going to the open solicitations page is the absolute best way to find out about what's available currently. IARPA follows a different cadence for our funding than our larger peers, such as NIH and NSF, larger in the sense of more constitutively focused on neuroscience research. The thing to understand about the applied research agencies is that programs are driven by the program manager. It has to come to the organization on a fixed term, project vision, build the community around a problem, launch the solicitation, and see the program through. And so we are rate limited in our ability to pursue work in the neurosciences by the availability of qualified and interested scientists who want to come to IARPA. So if there is something in particular, I myself, I'm on a maximum 5-year appointment, and I have a 1.5 years left, which isn't really enough, and I already run 4 or 5 programs. So in order to expand our neuroscience portfolio, come and contact us about working with us if you're interested and if you think something needs to exist, and you can make it happen. And I realize that's not as easy as saying, well, we're going to be funding X, Y, and Z over the next several years, but we're able to take bigger swings at problems, at higher risk problems in the applied research realm than other agencies are. So think about what you think we should be doing and tell us, and then we'll tell you to come help us do it.
Great. So I briefly wanted to follow up on a question that we have there, which is that, which I think a lot of people have, which is, you guys represent some of the best funding opportunities available to us neuroscientists. How do we generally find out about it? Like we just saw David's version. Any chance you guys can all just like quickly chime in kind of like on what's the best way for like scientists like me to sort of like get funded on like cool research projects?
Sure, I can hop in from the Simons Foundation perspective, which is, we do our best to reach out, and sometimes we aren't able or do a poor job at casting a wide enough net. And that's something we're actively working on. But the absolute best way is to come to our website and look at our funding opportunities. Also remember that our timelines are very different than the NIH's. So our calls aren't going to go up a year in advance of when they're due. I'm sorry, NIH, I'm probably misrepresenting how long your calls are. But our calls are sort of on much shorter timelines. And the types of applications that we solicit are also aligned with that. So look at our website often, sign up for our newsletters and our announcements, and that is absolutely and actually read them. And that's absolutely the best way, because it's not always the headline, right? But the information is always in there. So that's absolutely the best way to get the information from the Simons Foundation.
And I'm happy to chime in from the perspective of the Kavli Foundation, Konrad. I recognize that the approaches of private foundations may sometimes be opaque, especially because we operate in such a different way than do other funders in science. And so from the perspective of the Kavli Foundation, we are somewhat untraditional in the sense that we typically do not give out grants. We're not a traditional grant-making foundation with requests for proposals and so on. Our 2 primary mechanisms for supporting science are the Kavli Institutes, wherein we encourage scientists within the institutes to use the funds, these catalytic funds that come from endowments that we provide with matching support from universities. And we encourage them to use it in the most catalytic, best use for science that they can envision. So that's one of our mechanisms for funding. And then the other mechanism, which is targeted toward the broader community, is that of our catalyzing program. So these are meetings, pilots, initiatives that the community feels are really important to help to spearhead in their early stages. And so for these types of of initiatives and meetings, we do invite the feedback, suggestions, ideas coming from the broader community. We invite scientists to try and think big. And if we hear that this particular opportunity is something that is really resonant across many scientists in a field or across fields, for example, nano-neuro, also learning from other fields like astrophysics and beyond, then we try and support these efforts initially through meetings. But if there are pilot programs that can emerge out of them that are really promising, then we can follow up with those. One exception to this in terms of that RFP approach is that with the Neurodata Without Borders program, which we help to seed along with other partners and continue to partner with the Simons Foundation and others on, is that this one actually does offer seed grant opportunities. This is to help promote adoption of the data standard. And so there are opportunities that are available and posted on the nwb.org website. I think for the 2021 series of those will be posted at a later time. And so that's one opportunity that is an exception to the norm for the traditional Kavli Foundation approach.
Great, thanks so much. I would like to briefly switch to the questions that we had discussed before. So a lot of scientists are interested in the general trend here. So now, like, we have a lot of announcements that were out over the last couple of years, but clearly you guys have ideas of where the field is moving. You have ideas of how you think the funding climate's going to change and which things will become priorities that were, and which things currently might be very popular that kind of like are maybe not so much among the most interesting things for you. So I was wondering if who would be able to share some thoughts about like this trend in the field.
You're putting us on the spot, Konrad.
I know, but like, not like if when the Brain Initiative came, a lot of people said, well, finally someone prioritizes the development of technologies, and a lot of neuroscience is technology driven, no question. At the same time, it had a sudden flavor, and some people loved it and some people loved it less. But do you think this is kind of the direction that we're on, that we will keep going, or do you think that, say, we will pivot more clinical or more basic science or more engineering even? What's your flavors? What's your intuition there?
So I'm happy to, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's a great question. I think the fields are never static, and therefore the needs and the opportunities are also never static. As I mentioned, there's been just a breathtaking development of tools and discoveries over the last 5+ years from researchers not only within the biological sciences, but from outside. I think our vision for the NIH Brain Initiative is to, well, first of all, to continue developing these tools. I think we still need them, but also to start applying them in a more focused way toward biological problems. And there's a lot of effort in the NIH Brain Initiative portfolio that is focused on what I call circuit busting. But it's circuit busting using new approaches, and these new approaches involve new technical experimental tools, but also new ways of looking at circuits based on a theoretical grounding. So there's a growing portfolio in theory as it's applied to the understanding of how circuits drive behavior. So that's a very exciting development. Another area is to really push ourselves toward finding new ways of developing interventions for human brain disorders. Brain kind of is brain within NIH occupies an interesting space in that it was set up initially to be disease agnostic. It still is. We have 10 NIH institutes and centers participating in brain, each with their own disease mission focus. But brain does support quite a bit of work in first-in-human trials. And I think this is important because as we develop technologies for interventions in one disease, the hope, the aspiration is that they might be democratized across different disease modalities. So again, I think the opportunities are shifting because we're developing the ability to get into areas which we couldn't have gotten into before. And I've always contended that necessity is the mother of invention. We need people out there asking great questions to really give us the challenge to meet, and we will meet them with technologies. But bearing in mind that we, at least I'm a biologist, I'm still interested in biological questions. But it's the two go together. It's not either or. And I think what we saw in the first 5+ years of the BRAIN Initiative was an intensive focus on tool building, because the tools we had, frankly, were lacking in allowing us to answer the questions with the level of detail and resolution that we really needed.
And at NSF, we're always balancing, right? The need for tools that move the science forward, because that's the mission, along with the basic research. And so we have, ongoing programs in neuroscience, and those will continue to focus on larger questions and on computation and on how things are connected and how things work in the healthy brain, right? And we're going to continue to focus on training the next generation of scientists, which is the other part of our mission. And so you'll see that in all the neural systems core programs in iOS. You'll see that in the neural and cognitive systems call, right? That there is this balance between the calls for tools and the calls for really basic research to understand the healthy brain.
And I think one of the ways that the Simons Foundation can and does sort of augment and align with some of the things the NIH and the NSF are doing is we are really a basic science research organization. And we are also not focused on tools, and the investigators that we fund, we think deeply about how they might be able to leverage some of the tools and use those cutting edge technologies that have been developed by the NIH and the NSF, and even some of the work IARPA is doing. And we partner with Kavli in order to support a lot of these things. So we are, that sort of is our focus moving forward.
And I'm also happy to share and David as well. Yes, thanks, David. Yes, from the Kavli Foundation perspective, one of the areas that we've been seeing a lot of movement among our Kavli institutes in terms of trends is something that John, as well as Michelle, had brought up earlier, which is thinking about the side of the neuroscience spectrum of approaches coming from computation, mathematical neuroscience, and theory. Our Kavli institutes in some ways are our temperature gauge for where things are going within the scientific community. And we've already seen many moves within our own Kavli institutes to incorporate more of that community within each of the institutes. And so this is an area that's really exciting. I was also excited to hear about this NSF Institute on AI and the biological systems. But this is an area that we're also watching closely to see where this goes, not only within our institutes, but also if there are opportunities to bring different communities together. I was recently, well, I guess not recently, about a year or so ago at a symposium on AI and neuroscience. What are the connections between AI researchers and neuroscientists? How do they view each other? It's really interesting to watch the sociology of these different groups coming together. And that's one of the things that we also focused on, is thinking about how do you move the needle and changing the sociology of neuroscience. And so it'll be really interesting, I think, to think about opportunities in this space. And we always look for ideas on how to help that needle to move.
I think just because a lot of people have spoken since Konrad asked this question, my recollection of the question was, how do we see funding priorities changing over time, right? And if I can just offer my own opinion from inside the government, I've seen a very large focus over the first phases of the BRAIN Initiative on tool development, and now on acquiring hero scale data sets, right? On the Microns program, we've acquired petabytes of neural circuit maps. And it will take the work of 100 labs, a decade, to really mine all of the insights that there are in just this one data set. So I think of necessity, we're likely to see priorities in neuroscience transition from description to seeking understanding, as has been highlighted by multiple other speakers, because it just doesn't seem like a good use of the taxpayers' money to keep acquiring hero data set after hero data set if we are not demonstrating that we can extract the value from it that was the motivation for acquiring them in the first place. And so we're investing heavily in our ongoing programs at IARPA on tools for analysis and proofreading and trying to gain insight from these massive data sets. And then data sharing, which might be a good segue into another part of this discussion.
Yes, exactly. So we have an interesting question, which is to which level methods and approaches to data sharing are central to your missions that a lot of our audience will be interested in.
I mean, I can talk about that first. On microns, like I just mentioned, we have acquired probably the largest data set in neuroscience history. Now featured prominently on the Brain Initiative Alliance website. So thank you for that. And I mean, we're funding 3 main institutions to work with these data, and that's not going to be enough, frankly. So our teams have already taken the initiative on making the first generation of their data publicly available. You can go to microns-explorer.org right now, and you can load up a connectome in your web browser, a cortical connectome. And there are several initiatives that are already in the works for sharing larger portions of the data set, covering complete cortical circuits and the interactions between regions. So it's a priority for IARPA to make the data available as a force multiplier for our mission so that we can get as many groups working with it as possible. I'm happy to hear others' perspectives on that.
I think as we think about funding collaborations of scientists moving forward, like David, we are taking a huge leap funding. It's both an experiment scientifically and an experiment in the sociology of science, funding the International Brain Laboratory. And core to that is sharing data. Now that's within one collaboration, but we're of the opinion that in order for neuroscience to really move forward, we need much broader scale data sharing. And I think that's absolutely core to the future of neuroscience as we see it.
Chiming in from the Kavli Foundation perspective, the question was how core is data sharing or how central is data sharing within our mission. This is an area that we've been focusing on very deeply, again, because early on when the Brain Initiative was getting off the ground, we were hearing from many within the community about the need for data standards, which can help to enable sharing to take place. And so the Neurodata Without Borders program is one example of this. And at our foundation, Stephanie Albin has been really doing a fantastic job in helping to lead this program, importantly in partnership with scientists from the community, coming from universities, not only within the US, but also getting perspectives internationally as well. And so it is central for us because we see this as a critical enabler for the impacts of neuroscience data collection to really be realized.
Thanks so much for this discussion. I want to add one question that we should briefly go over before we'll have to wrap up in 3 minutes, which is the technology dissemination aspect. Now, like we generate all these technologies, we generate all those data sets. How are they going to become products that ultimately make its way out and make the world a better place?
Right. If I can just chime in quickly also to finish off the last conversation. I mean, the data dissemination and other resource and tools dissemination is critical, and it will be critical for any success of the Brain Initiative. The NIH Brain Initiative has set up a series of data resource sharing groups, and we're trying to build an ecosystem not only within our own projects, but also with an outward-facing view so that the entire scientific community can have access to use and reuse these data. So that's very important. We cannot do this alone. We will definitely be looking to our partners here to help get these resources out there and to really coordinate the efforts across the globe. Similar things can be said about dissemination of actual tools and resources. And again, I think the important thing here is to build a strong ecosystem. And I think we've already seen some remarkable successes, as Alyssa mentioned, in developing a sociology, right? A kind of a way for people to work collaboratively. Collaborative science, I think, is really the key to our success. It's quite frankly not the way many scientists approach what they do. We're rugged individualists, but I think people are already seeing the benefits of working collaboratively, and hopefully we can promote and cultivate that ethos into what we do. I think this really will help make the sum just much greater than the parts put together.
Yes, we've been very much in that space as well, focusing on not only funding the research but building communities, and we do that by gathering them together at PI meetings and at conferences. In fact, the Neuronext community, all the researchers that were funded by our Neuronext part of the Brain Initiative, will be gathering virtually later this week for a 2-day PI meeting.
Very, very nice. Great. So if there's no more, we have 2 questions, but I don't think we have time to talk about it. So I think I'd just like to wrap this up. What did we learn today? We learned that, like, yes, it's necessary to continuously trawl the web pages of all the agencies that are here. I wish that in the future we could have a Neuromatch-like matching mechanism that tells the right people the right things that they should know. The Brain Initiative is on a certain movement, and in a way we will see more of that movement in like a broadening, if anything, if I understood the answers right. And ultimately, yes, all the involved agencies are strongly working towards dissemination and making things useful. And I personally want to thank all of our participants here for the great insights they gave us about the funding structure. And let me clap in lieu of everyone else who you can't hear, but they're just as well outside. And I want to thank you for being here and discussing these questions with us. And of course, for supporting the Neuromatch movement. So thanks so much. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Konrad.
Thank you, Konrad.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.